I read the email 3 times because my brain refused to accept it on the first 2. We regret to inform you that we are unable to move forward with your application at this time. The third line is what actually got me. The part they always bury at the bottom. Polite and clean, like a knife wrapped in tissue paper. Our current team structure does not accommodate candidates of your designation. Designation, that is what they call it now. Not Omega, never Omega, just designation. A word sterile enough to sound legal, and cruel enough to feel personal. I locked my phone and put it face down on my thigh. I was sitting on the curb outside a grocery store on 5th and Marlowe. The kind of neighborhood where the buildings are old but the rents are not. The kind of place where I did not belong but could not afford to leave either. Because every cheaper option was further from every job I kept failing to get. 3 rejections this month. Different companies, same line, same reason. I had stopped being surprised around rejection number 7, somewhere back in March. Now it just sat in my chest like a dull, familiar weight. Not sharp enough to hurt properly, just heavy enough to make breathing feel like effort. My rent was 3 weeks overdue. The landlord had knocked twice already. The third knock I knew would come with a notice. I looked at the grocery store entrance. The automatic doors slid open every time someone walked through. Easy, effortless, like the whole world operated on a frequency I just could not tune into. I had $42 in my account, enough for 3 or 4 days of bare basics if I was careful, less if I was not. I had been standing outside for 11 minutes, which I knew because I kept checking my phone, not because anyone was waiting on me but because standing still with nothing to do made my thoughts too loud. I was about to leave genuinely. I had already pushed myself to stand when I heard it. Yes, my account number is 447. I turned around. She was standing maybe 15 feet away, just off the sidewalk near the corner, half in the shadow of the building. An elderly woman, white hair pinned up neatly, a cream-colored coat that had seen better decades, and both hands wrapped around her phone like she was afraid someone would take it. She was reading numbers off her screen, slowly, carefully, like she was doing something important, like she was being responsible. My stomach dropped. I knew that pattern. I had seen my downstairs neighbor fall for the exact same thing 2 years ago. The excited voice, the careful repetition of details, the belief that this was finally the moment. Prize calls, lottery scams, government rebate fraud. They all sounded different on the surface and were identical underneath. I walked toward her before I finished deciding to. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "I'm sorry to interrupt." She looked at me sideways, that particular look strangers give you on the street when they are calculating whether you are a threat or an inconvenience. I must have landed somewhere in the middle because she did not step back, but she also did not lower the phone. "I just need 1 moment," I said. "Please, I'm on an important call." "I know it feels that way," I said carefully, "but I think they might be trying to take your money." The voice on the other end picked up immediately, loud, aggressive, the kind of manufactured urgency designed to drown out doubt. I could hear it from where I stood. "Do not let anyone interrupt this process. This is time sensitive. You are about to lose your prize." She pulled the phone closer to her ear. Her expression tightened, not with anger at me, I realized, but with the specific anxiety of someone who had been told to be careful about exactly this kind of interference. They had coached her. Of course they had. That was part of it. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "I'm not trying to scare you or take anything from you. I work nothing. I want nothing. I recognize this. I've seen this happen before. Real prize organizations do not call you and ask for your account number. They don't." Silence on her end. The voice on the phone grew louder. She looked at me, really looked at me this time. Not the threat or inconvenience calculation, but something slower and more careful. Her eyes moved over my face the way people read something they are not sure they trust yet, but cannot stop reading either. Then she lowered the phone 2 inches from her ear. That was enough. "Can I see the number they're calling from?" I asked. She hesitated, then turned the screen toward me. It was a spoofed government line. I could tell immediately from the format, the area code that didn't match, the slight irregularity in the number string. I had looked these up once after my neighbor's incident, read 3 articles about it in a single afternoon out of a kind of furious helplessness. That afternoon was paying off now in ways I never expected. "This number has been reported," I said. It was close enough to true that I said it without guilt. "Please let me help you." She pulled the phone away from her ear completely. The voice on the other end escalated into something sharp and threatening. clearly audible now between us on the sidewalk. She stared at it. Then she pressed end call. The silence that followed felt enormous. She stood very still for a moment. Then something in her posture cracked. Just slightly, just enough. And I saw her hands start to tremble. I already gave them some information, she said. Her voice was steady but her eyes were not. Before you came. Okay, I said immediately, already pulling out my phone. That's fixable. We call your bank right now, flag the account, request a temporary freeze. They can reverse any pending transactions before they process. This happens more than you know. Banks have protocols for exactly this. She did not argue. She did not ask why I was helping or who I was. She just nodded once and I dialed. And for the next 22 minutes, I stood on that sidewalk and walked her through every step while she held her purse with both hands and listened carefully to everything I said. When it was done, account flagged, fraud report filed, confirmation number saved to her phone, she sat down on a nearby bench like all the energy had left her at once. I sat next to her at a slight distance, giving her space to collect herself. I had a half-empty water bottle in my jacket pocket. I held it out without saying anything. She took it. We sat quietly for a moment. What's your name? She asked. Lane. Lane Carter. You're an Omega. It was not a question. She had noticed, the way people always notice, whether they mean to or not. Yes. Do you live nearby? Close enough. Alone? Yes. She studied me the way you study something that doesn't quite fit the category you were expecting to put it in. Unhurried. Thorough. Like she was reading a sentence and discovering it meant something different than she had initially assumed. Then she said, come to my house. Have tea with me. You don't have to do that. My name is Eleanor Hatch, she said simply. Like that explains something. Maybe it did. I have had tea with very few people in my life who I actually wanted to have tea with. You are on that list now. I did not have a reason to say yes. My apartment was empty and cold and full of rejection emails and a landlord who would knock again in 2 days. There was no logical case for following a stranger to her house. Okay, I said. I could not have known then what I was agreeing to. I could not have known that the tea waiting for me in Eleanor Hatch's home would cost me everything I thought my life was, and give me everything I never knew I needed. The car she called was not a car. It was a statement. Black, sleek, driven by a man in a dark jacket who opened the door without being asked and did not look at me once, not dismissively, just professionally, in the way of someone trained to treat every passenger identically, regardless of what they were wearing or where they had been standing 15 minutes ago. I got in carefully, like the seat might reject me if I moved too fast. Eleanor settled in beside me and told the driver to take them home. She said it the way people say things they have said 10,000 times. Automatic, comfortable, without the small performative pause that people who are not used to being driven still give before speaking to drivers. I looked out the window and thought about my sneakers. They were clean. I kept them clean. That was something I had always been particular about even when everything else in my life was fraying. But they were worn at the heel and slightly too white in a way that read as deliberate effort rather than casual ownership. The kind of white that said I tried, not the kind that said I didn't have to. I was aware of this in a way I did not usually let myself be. When the car stopped, I understood immediately why. The house, if house was even the right word, sat at the end of a private lane behind iron gates that opened automatically at the car's approach. Stone exterior, tall windows, the kind of architectural quiet that only comes from serious, sustained money. Not new money either. New money builds to impress. This had been built to last. Clean lines, nothing excessive, everything exactly what it needed to be and nothing more. There were 2 staff members at the entrance who nodded at Eleanor without speaking, and one of them held the door open with the particular practiced neutrality of someone who had been doing it for years. I stepped out of the car and felt the gravel shift under my worn heels. The entryway alone was larger than my apartment. Marble floors that reflected the afternoon light coming through the high windows. Not ostentatiously, just factually. The ceilings were high. The walls held artwork I did not know well enough to name, but recognized as the kind that did not belong in a catalog. Everything was understated in the specific way that only becomes possible when you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. I became extremely conscious of the fact that I had $42 in my bank account. Eleanor walked through the entrance the way people walk through spaces that belong to them. Not slowly, not with any particular awareness of the environment. Just fluidly, as though the house rearranged itself slightly to accommodate her movement. She turned back once to make sure I was following and smiled in a way that said, "Stop thinking so loudly, I can hear it." She made the tea herself. She dismissed the kitchen staff with a small wave, pulled out 2 cups that I suspected cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and moved around the kitchen with the unhurried competence of someone who cooked not out of necessity but out of preference. I sat at the kitchen island and watched and did not offer to help because something about the way she moved made it clear she did not need any. "You've gone very quiet," she observed without turning around. "I'm taking it in. Is it overwhelming?" I considered lying. "A little." "Good," she said, which was not the response I expected. She set the cups down and looked at me evenly. "It means you're paying attention. Most people who come here stop seeing it after the 3rd visit. They adjust. The ones who stay curious, those are the ones worth having around." I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, which seemed to be acceptable. The tea was simple, black, slightly sweet, served without ceremony. It tasted like something expensive pretending to be ordinary, which I thought was probably a metaphor for the house, and possibly for Eleanor herself. "Why did you stop?" she asked. "On the sidewalk. You were leaving. I heard you." Lots of people heard me. The man from the pharmacy walked past. A woman with a stroller. They all heard me. I wrapped both hands around the cup. I recognized what was happening. "And that was enough to make you stop?" It was enough to make stopping feel like the only option. She was quiet for a moment, studying me over the rim of her cup with those steady, unhurried eyes. "You're not performing humility," she said finally. "You actually mean that." "Yes. That's rarer than you think." We talked for a long time after that. Not the careful, circling conversation of strangers being polite, but something more direct and easier than that. The kind of conversation that sometimes happens between people with nothing to protect from each other. I told her about the rejection emails, the designation line, the 3 weeks overdue rent, the specific exhaustion of waking up every morning and trying again inside a system that had already decided what I was worth before I opened my mouth. I told her about the loneliness that did not announce itself loudly but just sat in the background of everything, a low, persistent hum. She listened without interrupting, without the small sympathetic noises people make to perform empathy, without offering solutions or silver linings or the particular brand of optimism that is really just a way of ending a difficult conversation comfortably. She simply listened, completely, in the way that very few people actually do. It made me realize how rarely I had been truly heard by anyone. "I have a grandson," she said when I had finished. Just like that, without segue, the way people introduce a subject they have been waiting to introduce since the beginning. I set my cup down slightly too carefully. "His name is Caden. He runs the family company, has since he was 28. He's very good at it." She paused. "He's also very alone. Not in the way you're alone. You're alone because the world has been unkind to you and you haven't found your footing yet. He's alone because he built walls so high that even people who want to reach him can't figure out how." "Why are you telling me this?" "I'm not telling you anything yet," she said, with that small, careful smile. "I'm just talking." I did not press further, but I thought about it on the drive back the way she had said yet, deliberate and unhurried, like someone placing a word exactly where they wanted it to land. I thought about the way she had listened to me, really listened, and how long it had been since anyone had done that without wanting something in return. Her message came 20 minutes after I got home. "Come tomorrow evening at 6. I want you to meet Caden." I read it 4 times standing in my kitchen in my coat because I had not taken it off yet. Every logical part of my brain lined up to explain why this was a mistake, why the gap between her world and mine was not the kind of thing that got bridged over tea, why a woman's kindness was not a foundation for anything, why I should politely decline and go back to sending applications and waiting for the next rejection. I typed, "All right, I'll be there." He arrived at 7:14, exactly 74 minutes after I did. And I know the exact time because I had been checking the clock with the specific anxiety of someone who is already convinced they do not belong somewhere, and is now just waiting for the room to confirm it. Eleanor had given me tea again, and asked me questions about my week with the easy attentiveness of someone who remembered what you told them. The house was quieter in the evening, the staff moved less, the light came in differently, and the whole place took on a kind of composed stillness that would have been peaceful if I had not been sitting in it wearing my second-best shirt, and very carefully not thinking about how expensive the furniture was. Then the front door opened. I felt it before I saw him. Not metaphorically, not as some romantic instinct kicking in, but in the way that omegas feel alpha presence when it enters a room, a shift in the air pressure, a subtle change in the quality of the silence. My nervous system registering something and straightening up before my conscious brain had caught up. I had felt it before, around other alphas, but always as background noise. This was different. This was immediate and specific in a way I did not have a language for yet. Caden Hatch was tall. Not unusually so, but tall in a way that his posture made more significant. Straight-spined, unhurried, taking up exactly the amount of space he intended to take up, and not 1 inch more or less. His suit was dark gray, fitted without being showy, the kind of clothes that said money in the quietest possible voice, which is always the loudest kind. His hair was dark, cut close on the sides, slightly longer on top, pushed back in a way that looked effortless and definitely was not. And his eyes, when he finally turned them toward the room, were the specific gray of overcast sky right before weather rolls in. Not cold exactly, assessing. He crossed directly to Eleanor, bent and kissed her cheek with a gentleness that I would not have predicted from the rest of him. "You look tired," he said to her. His voice was low, even controlled, the voice of someone who had learned very early that volume was not the same thing as authority. "I look perfectly fine," Eleanor said, patting his arm. "Caden, this is Lane." He turned. 1 second, maybe less. His eyes moved over me with the particular economy of someone who evaluates quickly and accurately, and has learned not to waste additional time on conclusions he has already reached. I watched him take in the shirt, the shoes, my approximate age, my build, the way I was sitting, and I watched him file all of it somewhere and close the drawer. Then he turned back to Eleanor. "You didn't eat dinner yet," he said. "Not hello, not nice to meet you, not even the casual social acknowledgement of someone who had just noticed another person in the room." He moved from looking at me to talking to Eleanor as though the half-second he had spent on me had been more than sufficient. My jaw tightened, not visibly. I had practiced keeping things off my face, but inside, something sharp and small lodged itself between my ribs and stayed there. I was not surprised. I was not even particularly hurt. I had experienced more direct versions of this exact dismissal in job interviews, at government counters, in waiting rooms. The particular erasure that came not from hostility but from assessment, from someone deciding in one look that you did not require the energy of actual acknowledgement. What I realized was tired. Deeply, specifically tired of being evaluated and found insufficient before I opened my mouth. I kept my hands relaxed on the table and said nothing. Dinner was set by staff I had barely noticed appear. Eleanor guided the conversation with the practiced ease of someone who had spent a lifetime managing rooms, asking Caden about work, about travel, about someone named Marcus, who seemed to be a business associate. Caden answered in complete sentences, occasionally in longer ones when the subject engaged him, but always with that same controlled economy, like he rationed words the way cautious people rationed money. He did not address me directly for the entire first course. About halfway through the second, he asked Eleanor how she had been sleeping. "Wonderfully," she said. "Lane has been very good company this week." The first direct mention of my name in his presence. I watched him register it without reacting to it, a small, careful blankness that was its own kind of response. "Is that right?" he said. Not a question, a placeholder. The verbal equivalent of noted, filed, drawer closed. I picked up my fork and ate, and looked out the window at the garden, which was immaculate in the way of things tended by people who were paid to tend them. I thought about Eleanor making tea herself that afternoon, and how the contrast between that and all of this did not quite resolve into a simple picture of who she was. I found I liked that about her. Caden left at 9:30. He stood in the entryway with his jacket already on, efficient, self-contained, a man whose exits were as controlled as everything else about him, and spoke quietly to Eleanor about her follow-up appointment, a medication timing, something about a car being available. He was, beneath everything, genuinely concerned about her. That came through clearly, cleanly, underneath all the armor. At the door he paused. He turned and looked at me for the second time that evening. Longer this time, 4 or 5 seconds, which does not sound like much but is significant when someone has previously been treating you like furniture. His expression did not change, but his eyes did. A small, almost imperceptible shift, like a calculation being revised mid-process. Then he left. The door closed. I exhaled slowly. "Don't take it personally," Eleanor said from behind me, already moving back toward the sitting room. "He does that with everyone at first." "Does what? Exactly?" "Decides." She sat down and picked up her tea. "He decided something about you just now. He always decides quickly. The interesting thing about Caden is that he is usually right, but sometimes he decides too fast, before he has all the information. And when that happens, it takes something significant to make him reconsider. And has he ever reconsidered? She looked at me over her cup, with that particular expression she had, the one that felt like she was 3 conversations ahead of the one currently happening. He called me from the car, she said simply. I waited. He asked whether you could be trusted. She set her cup down. I said yes. He said. She paused, choosing the words. Send him to my office tomorrow, 10 o'clock. I stared at her. He said that. He did. He barely looked at me. He looked at you precisely as much as he needed to, Eleanor said. That is not necessarily a small amount, even if it didn't feel that way from where you were sitting. I sat with that for a moment. The garden outside had gone dark, and the room felt close and warm, and somewhere between the silence and Eleanor's steady gaze, I found myself understanding, slowly, that something had shifted tonight, that I did not yet have the context to name. Whatever Caden Hatch had decided in those few seconds, it had not been nothing. And tomorrow, apparently, I was going to his office to find out what it was. The elevator opened directly into his office. Not a lobby, not a reception area, not a waiting room with a polite assistant and a bowl of mints on the counter. Directly into the office itself, which told me something about Caden Hatch before he said a single word. This was not a space designed for people who arrived unexpectedly. You did not get to the 34th floor without being expected. You did not get through that elevator without a code. Everything about the architecture of this place said, I decide who reaches me. I had dressed carefully. My cleanest shirt, the dark one that read as intentional rather than circumstantial, pressed the night before with the iron I kept. Even when I had considered selling it. It was a small dignity. I held on to small dignities. The office itself was large without being excessive. The same quiet restraint as Eleanor's house, which made sense now. Floor-to-ceiling windows on the east side gave the city in its entirety, spread out 34 floors below like something that belonged to him, which in certain measurable ways parts of it did. His desk was clean. One monitor, one notebook, a single pen placed parallel to the desk's edge. The kind of order that was not performed for visitors but maintained regardless of whether anyone was watching. He was standing at the window when I came in. He turned, looked at me once and said, "Sit down." I sat. He moved to his desk and remained standing behind it, which I recognized as deliberate height, position, the subtle geometry of who is behind the desk and who is in front of it. I had been in enough offices where this was done unconsciously. With Caden, nothing was unconscious. "You're an Omega," he said. "No stable employment, no family here, correct? No preamble, no small talk." He was either extremely efficient or he had decided that performing courtesy for me was not worth his time, and I was not yet certain which it was. "Correct," I said. "I want to offer you a position, in-house personal assistant to my grandmother. Full-time, salaried, live-in access to the property." He finally sat down, opened the notebook and looked at me. "She trusts you. I need her to be looked after by someone she actually wants around, rather than someone she tolerates. Why not one of your existing staff?" Something shifted fractionally in his expression. Not displeasure, more like the minor recalibration of someone who had expected a different kind of question. "She dismissed 2 of them in the last 6 months. She doesn't want professional caregivers. She wants company." He paused. "You apparently provide that, and you're comfortable handing that responsibility to someone you met for 4 seconds at a dinner table." This time the shift was more visible. He studied me for a moment with those assessing gray eyes, and I got the sense that he was genuinely deciding something, rather than simply processing a delay. "I trust her judgment," he said finally. "She trusts you." The logic follows. It was not warm, it was not personal. But it was, underneath the economy of it, a real answer. Honest and direct in a way that I had learned to recognize as its own kind of respect, even if it did not look like the conventional version. Caden Hatch did not say things he did not mean. That was already clear. "I'll think about it," I said. He looked at me with an expression I could not quite categorize. Not irritated, something closer to surprised, and underneath the surprise, something that might have been interest, the particular kind that comes from unexpectedness. "Most people don't say that in this office," he said. "Most people probably need the job badly enough that thinking about it feels dangerous." I said. "I need it too. That's exactly why I should think about it." He said nothing for a moment. Then he wrote something in the notebook and closed it. "Tomorrow," he said. "Let me know by tomorrow." I took the job. The weeks that followed were some of the strangest and most unexpectedly full of my life. Eleanor was an extraordinary person to spend time with, not in the grand, declarative way that people describe extraordinary people, but in the daily accumulating way of someone whose quality of attention made ordinary moments feel significant. She remembered everything I told her. She asked follow-up questions days later. She laughed at things that were actually funny and did not perform laughter at things that were not, which sounds simple and is in practice remarkably rare. She also told me things about Caden that I had not asked for, and filed away carefully anyway, that he had taken over the company at an age when most people were still working out their career direction, that he had not taken a vacation in 4 years, that he had a habit of working through lunch and then being irritable by 3 in the afternoon and never connecting the two facts, that the last person he had genuinely let close had left in a way that taught him the wrong lesson about what closeness cost. I listened and said little, and tried not to examine too closely why I was so interested. 3 weeks in, on a quiet Thursday evening, Eleanor asked me to stay after dinner. She was sitting in the armchair by the window, and when I settled on the sofa across from her, she reached over and placed her hand over mine on the armrest. Her hand was cold, noticeably, specifically cold, in a way that made my breath slow without quite stopping. "I have to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." I nodded. "I have cancer." She said it the way she said most difficult things, plainly, without wrapping it in softness, because she respected both herself and the person she was talking to enough to be direct. "Stage 3. My oncologist is very good and very honest, and what he has told me is that we are managing rather than reversing. I have some time, not as much as I would like." The room was very quiet. "Caden doesn't know yet," she continued. "I'll tell him, but I wanted to tell you first because what I'm about to ask you is something I cannot ask him before I've asked you." She looked at me steadily, her hand still over mine, her eyes clear and serious and full of something that was not grief but was adjacent to it. "I want you to stay with him after I'm gone. Not as an employee, not as a friend in the background. I want you beside him properly, permanently, in the way that means he cannot simply close the door and disappear into himself, which is what he will do if I let him." I understood before she finished. "You're asking me to marry him?" "Yes," she said. "I am." The silence that followed was the longest of my life. Eleanor told him the following evening. I was in the sitting room when it happened, not by design but because I had still been there when Caden arrived, and leaving would have required walking past his car in the driveway and explaining where I was going, which felt worse than staying. So I sat with a book I was not reading and listened to the house. They were in her study. I could not hear words, only registers. Eleanor's voice steady and low, the particular cadence of someone delivering something prepared, something that had been organized internally over a long time before it was spoken aloud. And Caden's voice in response, at first nothing, which was its own sound, and then something brief and controlled, and then nothing again for a long time. That second silence was the one that settled into my chest and stayed. When he came out, I knew immediately that he had been standing behind that door for a few minutes before opening it. His face was composed, the jaw set, the posture deliberate, but the composition was effortful in a way his composure usually was not. His eyes were the thing that gave it away. They were darker than usual, or maybe just less defended, and when they found me across the room they held still for a moment, in a way that felt involuntary. He crossed to the armchair across from me and sat down. Not the chair furthest from me, which would have been the one consistent with his general pattern of maintaining careful distances, the one directly across. "She told you before she told me," he said. "Yes." He absorbed this without visible reaction. "How long have you known?" "Since yesterday." He looked at his hands for a moment. They were resting on his knees, completely still, with the particular stillness of someone who is controlling a great deal by controlling very little. I had been around Caden Hatch for 3 weeks at this point, and I had learned that the less he moved, the more was happening underneath. "She wants us to get married," he said. "I know. What did you tell her?" "That I needed to think." He looked up. Something in his expression shifted. Not softened exactly, but reconfigured, like a room that has been rearranged without removing any of the furniture. "You didn't say no immediately." "Neither did you," I said carefully. "Or you'd have led with that." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the evening had gone fully dark, and the room held only lamplight, which did something to the shadows around him that made him seem less like a version of himself, edited for public consumption, and more like whatever was underneath that. The scent of him reached me in the warm stillness of the room, something deep and wood smoke adjacent, and tonight threaded through with something raw that I did not have a precise word for, but recognized as pain carried quietly and without complaint for a very long time. My instincts pulled at me. I sat still. "She's the only person who has never asked anything of me," he said finally quietly, like it had not quite been intended as a spoken thought. "Every relationship I have ever had, professional, personal, all of it, has operated on an exchange. She is the only exception, and now she is asking me for something, and it is the one thing I cannot give on her timeline." I said nothing. He was not talking to me exactly. He was talking, which for Caden was a different thing, something rarer, something that I was not sure he had a lot of practice with. "I don't do things I'm not sure of," he continued. "I don't make decisions on insufficient data. I don't enter arrangements I haven't fully modeled." He looked at me directly. "You understand why this is difficult. I understand why it feels impossible," I said. "That's not the same as it being impossible." He considered this with the same quality of attention he seemed to bring to everything. Complete, unhurried, unperformed. "If it happened," he said carefully, "it would have to be real, not an arrangement that looks like something for her sake and is nothing underneath. I won't do that. It would be real, or it wouldn't happen." I agree with that completely. The admission seemed to land somewhere unexpected for him. He looked at me as though he had been prepared for resistance and had not worked out what to do with alignment. "We are strangers," he said. "Yes, that would have to change." "I know, I don't find that easy," he said. It was the most unguarded thing I had heard him say, and he seemed to know it because something briefly crossed his face. Not quite self-consciousness, but an awareness of having spoken from somewhere he did not usually speak from. "I don't think easy is what either of us needs right now," I said. He stood, buttoned his jacket, that automatic gesture, that reassembling of himself, and walked toward the door. He paused at the threshold without turning around, and I recognized this position. He had stood here once before at the dinner, that pause that seemed to contain something he had not finished deciding. "Why did you stay that day?" he asked. "On the street. You had no reason to get involved." I thought about it honestly before answering, because I looked at her and I recognized what was happening to her, and I knew that if I walked away I would spend a long time not being able to look at myself clearly. I paused. "That's not heroism, it's self-preservation of a different kind." He was still for a moment. Then he left, but at the door just before it closed, I heard his footsteps stop, a single beat of stillness in the hallway, and then they continued slower than before, in a way that felt less like departure and more like someone carrying something carefully that they had not been carrying when they arrived. I spent the night building a case for no. It was a thorough case, logically organized, emotionally accounted for, with clear reasoning that held up to examination from multiple angles. The gap between Caden's world and mine was not a gap, it was a canyon, the kind that did not get crossed by goodwill or circumstance alone. Eleanor's love for both of us was real, but love was not architecture. It could not hold the weight of something built on urgency and grief if the foundation was not independently solid. Caden did not want this. I was a stranger he had tolerated for 3 weeks out of deference to the woman he loved most. And whatever I had felt in that room last night, whatever pull existed in the warmth of his scent and the unguarded quality of his voice when he stopped performing composure, that was biology and proximity, not foundation. By 3 in the morning, the case was complete and I believed it entirely. By 5 I was watching the ceiling and understanding that I had been arguing against something I had already decided. It was not the logical side that broke first. It was something quieter and more specific. The memory of the way he had said it would have to be real, not as a condition or a warning, but as a disclosure. Something he needed me to know about him because pretense was genuinely not something he was capable of. A man who had every reason and every resource to perform whatever version of himself was most convenient, had stood in a lamplit room and said, "I can only do this if it means something." That was not the statement of someone who wanted to use me as a solution to a grief logistics problem. That was something else entirely. I got up at 6, dressed without overthinking it, and took the train to the Hatch property in the early morning quiet of a city not yet fully awake. I had not messaged ahead. I did not know what I was going to say exactly, only that the speech I had rehearsed overnight was not the right one. Eleanor was already awake. Of course she was. I had learned in 3 weeks that she slept lightly and rose early and considered both facts simply as information about herself rather than inconveniences. She was in the morning room with tea and a book, and when I appeared in the doorway she looked at me with an expression that suggested she had been expecting me, which was either intuition or the particular confidence of someone who had understood the situation more clearly than either of its participants from the beginning. Caden was there too. He was standing at the window, the same posture as in his office, hands in his jacket pockets facing outward. He turned when I walked in. His face was the composed version, the CEO version, but his eyes were tired in a way that suggested he had spent his nights similarly to how I had spent mine. "My answer is yes," I said. Eleanor set down her cup. The sound of it was very small in the morning quiet. Something moved through Caden's expression too fast and too complex to fully read. Layers of things processing simultaneously, and for a moment his face was simply a face and not a managed surface. And I saw in it the tiredness and the grief, and underneath both of them, carefully, something that was trying to decide whether it was allowed to be relief. "There's a condition," I said. Both of them waited. "This has to be built honestly. I won't perform a marriage. I won't play a role for external consumption and then live something hollow behind it. If we do this, we learn each other, actually slowly, without pretending the distance isn't there just because we've decided to close it. I won't rush that, and I won't fake it." I looked at Caden directly. "I mean what I said last night. I can only do this if it's real, so can you." He held my gaze for a long moment. "Agreed," he said quietly. The ceremony was small. 3 people, a civil officiant, Eleanor's preferred sitting room, rearranged only slightly for the occasion. She had wanted nothing large, and I was grateful for that, because something large would have felt like a performance, and what was happening in that room was the furthest thing from that. It was a beginning being made carefully, with full knowledge of everything it did not yet have, by people who had decided that careful honesty was worth more than comfortable pretense. When Caden took my hand formally, finally in front of the officiant's words, his grip was steady and his palm was warm. I felt the steadiness of him pass through the point of contact and into me, and something that had been tightly held in my chest for years, that low, persistent hum of being fundamentally untethered, loosened, just slightly, just enough to feel the difference between before and after. In the car driving home, he was quiet for a long time. "Then you're still a stranger, so are you." "That bothers me less than it should," he said, which was not nothing, from him. "We have time," I said. 3 months later, we did not have time in the same way. Eleanor left on a Tuesday, with both of us beside her, her hand in his and her other hand reaching for mine in the last few minutes. The 3 of us completing the small geometry she had built. She did not say anything in those last moments. She had said everything she needed to say in the months before. What she did was look at both of us, once, clearly, the way she looked at things she had understood and made peace with. That night Caden knocked on my door at 11:30. I opened it. He was still in the clothes he had been wearing, jacket off, collar open, looking like a man who had been sitting with grief for hours and had run out of ways to do it alone. "I don't want to be in a separate room tonight," he said. Not a request exactly, just the truth, offered plainly, in the way of someone who had finally run out of composure to maintain. "Then come in," I said. He sat beside me on the bed. Not close, not performing closeness, just present in the same space. We did not speak. The silence was not empty. It was full of Eleanor and of everything she had set in motion, and of the 2 people she had understood better than they understood themselves, finally occupying the same quiet in the dark. I thought she was right. Not just about us, about what we each needed, about what we had each been missing without the language to name it, about the fact that sometimes the most important things arrive sideways, through a stranger's act of ordinary decency on a sidewalk, through a cup of tea and a clear-eyed woman who loved her grandson enough to do something audacious on his behalf. This was not the ending of something. Outside the window, the city continued its indifferent hum. Inside, in the quiet, something was beginning. Slowly, carefully, honestly. The only way either of us knew how to do anything that actually mattered,